Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Leslie Bester. I run a company called less.net, and my presentation is going to be about voice over IP and voice over IP related fraud. So a little bit about myself. This is the first time I've ever worked PowerPoint on this machine, by the way. I'm president of less.net. It's an internet service provider here in the city. We do fiber-based internet services in downtown Winnipeg, co-location. We have the first Hurricane Electric 10 gigabit connection in the city. A competitive local exchange company, carrier, which is effectively a phone company. Have the largest SIP coverage in Manitoba, about 110 towns, including Winnipeg, adding about another 120 in the next 3-4 months. Provide phone numbers throughout Canada, the United States, toll-free, and with the exception of toll-free, all the numbers are SMS-enabled, so you can send and receive SMS. I'm the co-founder of the Manitoba Internet Exchange and past board member of the Canadian Association of VoIP Providers, it's been defunct for years now. But so, voice over internet protocol. Voice, we modulate our larynx caused by air pressure from our lungs to make tones and that sort of thing. It uses the internet, which I love to say is a series of tubes. Those tubes are 8 micrometers in diameter, and they're made of glass, and it's called fiber optics, and we shine lasers down them to communicate information. And the protocol IPv4 and IPv6, and in this case SIP. There are some older protocols like H323 and IAX for asterisk as well. I stole this from Wikipedia, quite literally. The public switch telephone network is the aggregate of the world's circuit switch telephone networks that are operated by national, regional, and local telephone operators, providing infrastructure and services for public telecommunications. The PSTN consists of phone lines, fiber optic cables, microwave transmission towers, cellular networks, satellites, undersea cables, and they're all interconnected by switches, allowing anybody to phone anybody else in the world. It originally started as a fixed line service, and they've integrated, or mobile has come out of that as well too. There's a bunch of worldwide standards that it all runs by. They're defined by the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. There's the E164 Global Address Numbering Scheme, much like ARIN in North America has allocations for IPv4 addresses. There are global allocations of phone numbers and country codes, and every carrier gets their own range, so there's no overlap, and everything's unique. And it runs on signaling system number 7, and there's an ANSI and ITU implementation of that. So SS7, it was ratified shortly before the 7-layer OSI model was completed. There's point codes, multiple layers to the protocol, MTP2 and MTP3. Calls are set up and torn down by ISUP, ISDN user part. There's TCAP transaction capabilities, and the newer side of SS7 is essentially taking those MTP3 packets and putting them over IP, and that's called SIGTRAN. So SS7 is much like Ethernet. Your point code is the equivalent to a MAC address, and the MTP3 layers are your layer 3 payload, where you put your payload to transmit your information for controlling calls. So there's numbering resources on the telephone network. We're country code 1 in world zone 1. That's why we dial long distance numbers within North America, starting with a 1. If you want to invoke something out of the United Kingdom, for example, you would use country code 44. China is country code 86, I think, off the top of my head. There's regional and national resource administrative bodies that control these numbering resources. In North America, it's called the NAMPA, the North American Numbering Plan Administration. And Canada participates in the North American Numbering Plan, and the Canadian Numbering Administration is the entity that qualifies whether you're entitled to numbering resources and allocates them and makes sure they're entered into various databases for routing. Toll-free numbers are just controlled by a RESPORG or a responsible organization in the SMS 800. So they take care of 800, 855, 866, 877, and 888 prefixes. And one interesting aspect of numbering resources is that they're not actual personal property. A lot of people think they own their phone number, but the phone numbers are actually the property of the various administrative bodies that control them. So in Manitoba here, where I'm a CLEC, there's numbering. LessNet has the 204-666 exchange. I don't know if you could read the blue there, but the CNAC publishes all of the central office codes that exist across Canada. So 204-661-8088 is the operating company number for MTS, and this indicates that 204-661 is a Winnipeg-based phone number. 204-662 is Sinclair, 204-664 Poplarfield, and we have 204-666 for LessNet, and my operating company number is 141F. So you have the numbering code, country code 1, you have the numbering plan area, the NPA, or the area code, which is 204, and every telephone company has their own central office code, or NXX, that is allocated to them in order to provide local service in an area. So, for example, I have numbers in Steinbach and Selkirk, so I would have, I think Steinbach is 204-864, and I don't remember what Selkirk is. And then the last 4 digits of the 10-digit, 11-digit phone number is the subscriber number. Every phone number has a routing number. So there's essentially a master database of all the North American numbers, and every number has an associated operating company number and a local routing number, or an LRN. The LRN is a subset of the central office code that's assigned to that carrier. So for Winnipeg and the towns surrounding Winnipeg, if somebody ports a number to LessNet or we assign them a number, they all have an LRN of 204-666-0010. And the last 4 digits are arbitrary, and they shouldn't be assigned as working numbers to end users. So whenever you make a phone call, the switch dips into the master database of all of the telephone numbers and figures out who the operating company is that owns that number or hosts that number on their switch. And it returns the LRN of the switch that the DID is homed to. So technically it's kind of possible to have a Winnipeg number homed to a Steinbach switch, but it would break routing. Like, it would only work in certain circumstances. So carriers will have a number of trunks and circuits to various other carriers, and they build a database by hand, generally, of all of the LRNs that exist, what carriers they're connected to, what trunks are available. So when you make a phone call, it does a dip to the database, figures out what phone company it's homed to, what the routing number is. If that carrier has a trunk to that particular carrier that it's home to, it'll use that trunk, otherwise it'll use some other method to deliver the call. So when you port a number, the only thing that really happens is the OCN of the DID changes, or the phone number, and the LRN of the phone number changes. I can barely read this. So this is the Number Portability Administration. I don't know what the C stands for off the top of my head. They have a thing called a subscription, and every phone number has a subscription. So when you port a number, you create a new subscription based on a certain time, and you specify the routing number of what to change to port the number. So this screen is essentially what somebody data enters things into in order to port a number, and the process is fairly instant. It actually takes a couple seconds to port a number. All of the other hour, day, week, or month delays are all administrative. So here's a very simple indication of the PSTN. You have one subscriber, and they've got a telephone line connected to a local switch, and you have another subscriber, and they have a telephone line connected to that switch as well too. So this is in a world where there's one phone company, one switch, and everybody's connected to the same switch. So if somebody wants to call the other person, it just essentially hairpins the call out of the switch. When you have switches over a geographic area, like a Winnipeg switch and a Brandon switch, you'll have an intermediate switch called an access tandem. So in Manitoba, there's 2 access tandems. And every switch in Manitoba is in some way connected to at least one of these access tandems. And in some cases, the switches may be connected to each other. So if somebody in Winnipeg calls Brandon, hits the Winnipeg switch, hits the access tandem, hits the Brandon switch, hits the subscriber. So there's a number of different types of phone lines. There's analog lines, or POTS as they call it, plain old telephone system. There's digital lines, which are ISDN, or Integrated Services Digital Network, an acronym that came out decades ago now, and the only thing it really took traction on is phone lines. There's the ISDN BRI, the basic rate interface, which is 2 bearer channels, or 2 conversational channels in the data channel, and the ISDN PRI, which is effectively what's in use now. Not many BRIs exist anymore. So PRI has 24 channels. 1 channel is dedicated to call setup and tear down. The other 23 channels are dedicated to voice. So PRIs use T1s. There's 24 circuits, or 24 channels on a T1 at 64 kilobits each. And Europe uses a variant of that, 2 megabit, which is an E1, so they have 32 minus the D channel. So 23 for North America, 31 for Europe. So private branch exchange is effectively a privately owned telephone switch. It's that Nortel, Avaya, Mitel box that's in the telecom room of your office or whatever, and there are analog lines going into them and digital lines like PRIs going into them, and they've been around for quite a while. An analog PBX will generally have 4 lines minimum, and can go up to dozens of lines. Once you get to somewhere where you're doing 25 or 50 lines, you would move to a PRI. So in this particular scenario, you have a subscriber talking to their local phone company, and then a company has an analog PBX with 4 phone lines connected to the phone company, and then within their organization they have 8 handsets. So they can have up to 4 people talking at the time. They can do intra-office calls between each other and call out using those 4 lines. ISDN basics. So an ISDN can carry 23 channels. You can buy a PRI with 5, 10, 11, 12, whatever combination of channels you want. You pay per channel. You pay a base fee for the PRI service and a cost per channel. A phone number is called a DID, or a direct inward dial number. You can have any quantity of DIDs on a PRI. Before LessNet became a CLEC, I just simply used Bell PRIs. I had 2 of them, and I had over 2,000 DIDs running on those 2 PRIs. So when an ISDN call occurs, and it's coming from the direction of inbound from the ILEC or CLEC that you're connected to, the CLEC chooses the channel to use on the PRI, and when you make an outbound call from your PBX, your PBX knows what channels are in use, not in use, and it chooses whatever channel is available to make the outgoing call. So in an ISDN call setup, you'll have a number of things: called number, calling number, and calling name, presentation, privacy invoked, that sort of thing. So generally with PRI, the one common thing I see with tech support for our users is DIDs actually don't make phone calls. People call DIDs, and when you make an outward telephone call, you present the caller ID that just coincidentally happens to be the same as a DID that you have, so somebody can call you back. So with a PRI in the digital network, you specify the caller ID and the caller name you want to present at the time of call setup. And there's generally no restrictions on what you can put in the caller ID if you want. Some carriers will actually limit it to the DID has to be, the caller ID has to be a DID that you have, but you can spoof the caller ID quite easily. So here we have a digital PBX, 23 concurrent calls. The PBX is connected to the local switch, and there's 430 whatever telephone extensions inside. You can have multiple PRIs connecting to a PBX as well. So there's aggregation service providers. That is something that's not quite a CLEC and is or was the norm before internet telephone service providers came about. So a service provider would find a multi-dwelling unit, an office or a shopping mall. They would install a PBX. They'd run a PRI to the PBX. The service provider would pay for all of that, and then they would essentially install extensions into every customer's premise. So a provider will have 1 PRI, install 5 phones in every business. The PRI costs them $21 a month. They sell the line to the end user at $20 per month, or $21 or less or more or whatever, and they make their margin by simple oversubscription. And oversubscription really isn't a bad word in this sense. It's just a natural result of everybody not using the phone lines at the same time. So along come internet telephone service providers, ITSPs as they're called. And in the past, what they would have done, and still do to this day, sort of, is they buy multiple PRIs from a local carrier, like LessNet bought PRIs from Bell. And they plug these PRIs into a media gateway and convert it to IP and SIP, plug it into the internet, and there you have voice over IP. So they'll add value-added things like voicemail and IVR menus and call queues and routing and that sort of thing. So an ITSP can get a much higher oversubscription rate. Like I had 2 PRIs, which is 46 lines and 2,000 DID, so whatever the math of oversubscription on that is. And of course, you never design it so that you're busy. You always have more capacity than you need, but naturally there's an oversubscription that allows it to occur and make money. So obviously you need a PBX that's capable of talking SIP as well too. So I'll jump back to the physical infrastructure again. There's in the telecom world, those ILEX and CLEX. The incumbent is the company that's been around forever in MTS. That's Manitoba, Saskatchewan, that's SaskTel. There's competitive local exchange carriers, which LessNet is, and MTS would be a competitive local exchange carrier in not Manitoba. So wherever what is not your incumbent region, you go operate outside that, and then you're a CLEC. So CLECs connect to ILEX. There's bill and keep trunks, there's transit trunks. So in this diagram here, an MTS customer wants to call a LessNet customer. They connect to the MTS switch, goes to the bill and keep switch, where LessNet switch is connected to, and then it goes to the LessNet subscriber. And this is all done over private fiber networks that the carriers agree to build to each other. So in the case where I want to send a call to not MTS, for example, Shaw is connected to MTS in the same way that I am. A Shaw subscriber, or this is the direction of going to Shaw. So I would send a call to the transit switch would send it to the bill and keep switch, and the bill and keep switch would send it to the Shaw switch, and it works in both directions that way. There's imbalance in settlement. Carriers don't actually pay for phone lines or phone numbers. End users pay for the service. So I have a OC3 to MTS, for example. I don't pay for that. I had a one-time build cost to put the fiber in the ground and activate the circuits on there, and the phone numbers are $9 a year for every 10,000, so 1,000th of a cent per number. So so you don't pay for the lines, you don't pay to provision them, you don't pay on a recurring basis. What you pay for is an imbalance that occurs over them. So if all of the calls to my network amount to 10 million minutes, and I only send 6 million minutes of calls out to MTS, then there's an imbalance of 4 million minutes, and MTS has to pay me the privilege of delivering those calls to me. So there's an ITSP versus CLEC. All ITSPs need to purchase their access from a CLEC or an ILEC. You can't be a VoIP provider without being a CLEC or without buying service from a CLEC. It's impossible if you want to talk to the PSTN. So ITSPs buy their PRIs, and they pay for channels, and they pay for DIDs. And CLECs don't pay for PSTN access, and the DIDs are free. And CLECs are starting to provide the service directly to end users, bypassing ITSPs. So ITSPs have to get more creative in the service that they offer and the value add that they offer, like hosted PBX services and that sort of thing. So we have IP PBXs. In the old days, PBXs were that Nortel box that you have screwed to the wall. And now they just run on a commodity PC with software called Asterix. So you download an ISO off the internet, you throw it on some crappy old PC that's been sitting in the back room for 10 years, and you have a PBX that is more feature-rich than pretty much most hardware-based PBXs that are out there. So Asterix forms the foundation of most PBX software today. There's some other projects out there like OpenSIPs and FreeSwitch and that sort of thing. FreePBX, Trixbox, Elastix are some variants. Basically, these are systems that include Asterix and a web-based interface to them, so you can manage the phones, create trunks, configure your internet service or internet telephone service provider. You download the ISO, you install it, next, and you have a PBX. There's call queues, conferencing, voicemail, menus, and it's all free. So a typical IP PBX scenario, customer would provision an Asterix machine. and throw a bunch of VoIP phones on the internet or in the office, and they would talk to the asterisk machine. They would find an ITSP like LessNet and sign up. They'd port their numbers to us, and then LessNet is essentially their phone company. So ITSPs can just be simple value added. Buying PRIs or an ITSP can be C like LessNet is. Either way, it's a VoIP. So now we get to the sort of scary stuff. There's quite a comprehensive fraud detection system that I've had to build into the system that's been there for a number of years, because basically what people do is they go onto the internet and they go, I'm going to build a PBX. They download an ISO, they throw it on a PC, they configure it, it works, and that's it. They don't think about security, they don't think about firewalls, they don't think about proper passwords, and the machines get compromised on a daily basis. It's not uncommon for me to see 2 or 3 separate customers get hacked in one day. There's thousands of customers, but people basically just install the ISO, the password's admin, the password's password, and this thing's on the internet, and eventually it gets hacked. So VoIP phones will have weak passwords. The Astra, some of the older Astra phones, you actually could not change the administrative password from 2222222 without doing a TFTP update. So it would say it changed the password, but you couldn't. So there was no way to actually put the phone on the internet with a real password. So the VoIP phone's a web server, just like anything else. You log into it with HTTP. There's default passwords. You put in your credentials for your service provider, and you connect to their proxy server. So with brute force, there's a program called SIP-Vicious. It scans the internet, looks at port 5060, sends out an options, figures out if it gets a response, and now it knows that IP address is VoIP. Then it feeds it a dictionary for the usernames and the passwords until it gets something that actually registers, or they just do a brute force administrative, like an HT access kind of access to the web server on the phone. Either way, there's multiple ways to brute force a simple device that's a web server on a public IP on the internet, and it's very, very common. So multiple SIP-Vicious attacks occurring at the same time can cripple an ITSP in a matter of seconds, really. It's like 100,000 queries per second. A database isn't going to handle that, especially if it's happening 5 times at once. So some common extension hacks for phones: default IP address for the admin password, or default password for the phone. The phones have firmware backdoors or critical flaws that no people discover. Hackers get into the phones, they steal the username, the password, and the IP address that they're using for their service provider, like LessNet, and then they register the phone to that credential with their own equipment. So you have a phone on the internet, it's got an IP address, somebody hacks it, somebody else, the hacker, has a phone, they've already stolen your credentials, they put it in their phone, and now the PBX thinks that the hacker's phone is your phone. Common PBX hacks, like I said, you put an ISO, install it on your machine, and leave the default password there. There's a brute force, obviously, for administrative passwords, backdoors in the authentication handling for the PBX software. So if you steal the credentials that the PBX is using, then you have the credentials to talk to the ITSP directly. Whereas if you steal the extension credentials, you appear as an extension to the PBX to the service provider. So there's a few ways to detect hacks. The customer notice they have no balance because it's been eaten by a hacker. Like if somebody's sent $1,000 worth of calls on a prepaid account, now they don't have a balance, they log in to find out why they don't have a balance. They see 1,000 calls or 10,000 calls in their call detail records, and they realize they've been hacked. In LessNet's case, we can detect hacks in certain circumstances. There's a known list of bad numbers that hackers call repeatedly to test whether the route is open. Customers can audit their own CDR records from their own PBX or through the ITSP. So if you have a telephone registered to your PBX and that hacker has that credentials and he has a telephone registered to that PBX, somebody tries to call your telephone, chances are it may go to the hacker. So one way that this manifests itself is that somebody's calling you, somebody else answers the phone that's not you, or your phone just doesn't ring. Okay, almost done. So some hack examples: a customer has an IP PBX on the internet with remote extension. Hacker scans and finds the extensions, brute forces into the system, registers as the end user, and can now use those credentials or go out directly through the PBX and use it as free long distance. And sometimes you can't detect this for days or weeks, and they could hack your PBX as well too, and then immediately use it, or just keep those credentials and use them 6 weeks from now. So exploit aggregation is when they hack dozens or hundreds of these PBXs and create a botnet, and then sell access to this botnet to the open market, a black and gray market, and charge upstream carriers saying we have routes to Iran and Afghanistan and all that sort of stuff. Here's our rate. And they terminate those calls through a cluster of compromised machines. So the PBX user is ultimately liable for that cost. Exploit scams. People hack into the PBX. They set up an auto dialer. The auto dialer calls a whole bunch of people, says it's a credit card company calling. Enter your card number or call this number back. We need to contact you because your bank account's been compromised, yada, yada. People call back the number, enter their card information, and it's quite easily captured with 20 lines of asterisk code. One of the biggest things is traffic imbalance settlement, and that's when you have a country that costs, let's say, 25 to 50 cents a minute to call, and the fraudster has a relationship with that local carrier. That local carrier receives that 25 or 50 cents a minute for every call that goes into their network, and then they decide to split the revenue somehow. So they hack a whole bunch of machines. They set up 100 concurrent calls out of that hacked machine at 50 cents a minute, and they keep it up for 4 hours or 4 days or until somebody detects it. And thousands and thousands of dollars could basically evaporate quite instantly. So that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? Pardon me? Okay. Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Les.